Born of a mistress burdened by succession and a selfish tyrant prince. These are enough reasons to be targeted. And that's exactly why Prince Rudolf is facing his assassin straight in the eyes. Even the assassin is confused why the prince isn't resisting. When asked, Prince Rudolf's eyes widen as he thinks of the question. Why? It's because he knows his future. Several hours before that incident at Baltic Empire in Scorpio Palace, the fourth prince's palace, the men are frustratingly waiting. It's been 7 days since Prince Rudolf was poisoned and things aren't looking good. If it were up to these men, it would be nice if the prince would just die. The maids stare at them with worry, silent as they knock on the prince's door. Opening the door, the maids are surprised to see Prince Rudolf sitting up and wide awake. Prince Rudolf stares blankly ahead while the maids frantically tells him he's been asleep for 7 whole days. The older maid then instructs Maya to go and call the physician. He watches as the maids frantically informs everyone that the prince is awake. Sighing, Prince Rudolf only sees them as noisy. In his mind, he knows there's nothing to worry about since he also knows he won't die, at least not yet. The physician then gives the prince a thorough examination, while the maids and guards watch in disdain. When the physician asks him of his name and age, the prince scratches his head before telling him he's Rudolf I Baltic and 14 years of age. The next question would be if the prince knows his background, to which Prince Rudolf says he's the 4th prince of the Baltic Empire. His father is the emperor, while his mother is a mistress who created Rudolf to join the imperial family. Prince Rudolf says this so casually that leaves everyone stunned. But he's not done yet, as he tells them his siblings and relatives despise him because he's a child of a mistress and poisoned him. Hearing enough, the physician urges the prince to stop and deems him fit to continue resting. Before the physician leaves, he tells Rudolf he hopes he recovers quickly. With him, all the maids and guards also excuse themselves to leave. Left alone, Rudolf does some thinking. Those servants earlier? It's almost as if they're there to watch him like a hawk. They're probably going to report to their real masters about this. By real masters, Rudolf knows the queen and his brothers are the ones behind this scheme. After all, Rudolf is only a nuisance to them. Meanwhile, the 2 maids earlier are gossiping about Rudolf. One believes that the prince was acting quite stranger earlier. She felt like Rudolf was too calm even though he almost died. The other maid agrees and says they don't know what's going through his mind, especially of the rumors that there are many spies in the castle. The maids know Prince Rudolf doesn't have allies and could probably be full of fear and anxiety at the thought of getting assassinated at any given time. Back at the prince's room, Rudolf is currently washing his face as he thinks about what he knows. It's already a fact for him that he won't die and will live for at least 10 more years. After all, he came from 300 years in the future. This is all written in history, which he knows well. Rudolf recalls when he was on the verge of death from the poison. The memories of his previous life suddenly came rushing in. In the future of this era, he was born as a villager in a rural town. After he died as an average villager, his soul went back in time and space. He had reincarnated into Rudolf I Baltic. Rudolf was known for being the hopeless tyrant prince. He would make a fuss when he didn't like something. He would yell, curse, and ask for unreasonable things. The person he was before his memories returned was the worst human possible. He's utterly disgusted with his past stupidity. As he sits down to think of how he should live from now on, an assassin broke in from his room's window. The assassin quickly held Rudolf onto the ground as he points a sharp dagger at the prince. Unfortunately for him, Rudolf isn't resisting at all. As the assassin is about to plunge the dagger into Rudolf's chest, he is shot by an arrow from the royal guards, who screams for the assassin to get away from the prince. With his arm wounded and his ploy being caught, the assassin quickly escaped through the window. The royal guard then screams for them to run after the assassin, but the maid tells them to stop since the prince's safety takes priority. The maid then asks if the prince is okay, to which Rudolf just casually tells them to leave after they clean the glass shards. After that, Rudolf lays in bed. Despite knowing he's saved and knowing he won't die yet, it was still a scary experience. The assassin really tried to kill Rudolf for real. When he thinks that he might get stabbed by the knife, Rudolf gets the heebie-jeebies. Come to think of it now, Rudolf realizes that book seems real. The book Wilhelm War Record is his favorite book from his previous life. It was an epic poem praising the hero Wilhelm. It was also a history book based on historical facts and had details about what happened 300 years ago, which is the current timeline. The poison attempt on Rudolf and earlier's assassination attempt were things recorded in the book. Even though Rudolf knew of it, he really doesn't want to experience that ever again. In other words, Rudolf knew he wasn't going to die earlier because that will happen in around 10 years when he's at the age of 25. According to the book, Rudolf's suspicion grew after repeated assassination attempts. After that, he will murder all of his brothers and the prince becomes the cruel emperor. He leaves his name in history as a tyrant of unprecedented cruelty. Rudolf's personality probably broke due to fear and suspicion. If this goes just like in history, Rudolf will kill all his brothers and become a tyrant, Unloved and not needed by anyone, he will curse everything and die in suffering. Putting on his coat, Rudolf has decided against his doomed fate. Today he will fight against fate and survive through it. He possesses the memories of the future. That's enough for him to be able to change history. Rudolf then approaches one of his drawers and opens it, revealing a box with a single coin in it. As he looks at it, he remembers her. One day he will be reunited with that girl. As he clasps the coin, Rudolf thinks of his game plan. Right now, his first step is to change history. It's to discern who his enemy is and eliminate them. He'll resolve all the problems within the palace. With that, Rudolf asks his maids for the palace's ledger. The maids are confused with his request, so the prince had to explain how his work got delayed when he was sick. He then tells them to bring the ledger of the Scorpio Palace at once. His request is met with silence. Instead of heeding Rudolf's instructions, the maid asks him what's wrong since the prince is suddenly asking for the ledger, something he has never done before. Rudolf then apologizes to the maid, whose name is actually Tappel. Up until now, he has pushed all the work up on her, but since he's going to be 15 soon, Rudolf wants to learn to do his official duties. Tappel tells him he doesn't need to worry about the chores and to leave those to the maids, especially that the prince must be exhausted from the assassination attempt earlier. Despite Rudolf telling her he's fine and to just get the ledger, Tappel doesn't budge at all. The maid reasons out how they're currently searching for the assassin, hence why they're putting the prestige of the imperial palace at stake. Tappel promises to find the assassin, so she urges Rudolf to just rest. With a boring look on his face, Rudolf tells her that the assassin was probably sent by one of his brothers. They're just going to find a random person and make him the culprit. With that, Rudolf insists on Tappel getting the ledger. Suddenly, Tappel hugs the prince and cries out how she's sorry to hear such things, especially that Rudolf has accepted the fact that he and his brothers will have to kill each other for the throne. Tappel then asks the prince to remember that she's been serving him as his personal maid since Rudolf was born. She was the one who changed her diaper on behalf of his mother. With that, Tappel swears by her brooch that no matter what danger may lie ahead, Rudolf can always rely on her. Tappel promises to always be by his side. As Tappel hugs him once again, Rudolf is in utter silence as he realizes this maid is the one who's been lining her pockets behind the scenes. According to the war record, Tappel had always been standing beside the cruel Emperor Rudolf. She's a venomous woman who uses his name to do all the extravagance. This kind of woman would do bad things even in peaceful times. Rudolf did try setting a trap with asking for the ledger, and Tappel's bad acting implies that she's guilty. With a smile on his face, Rudolf thanks Tappel for her hard work. For the sake of Rudolf's peaceful life, he needs to get rid of this maid. In order to do that, the prince won't let her gloss it over. He needs definitive proof. Rudolf then expresses how happy he is that Tappel thinks much of him, so he urges her to teach him if there's something he doesn't understand after seeing the ledger. Now that that's decided, Rudolf tells her he'll have his dinner first before he gets to work. After finishing his food, Rudolf already thinks that Tappel is probably busy trying to destroy evidence right now. As he walks down the hallway, he spots Maya crouched down on the floor. When the prince asks her what's wrong, Maya explains how the handle of the water jug suddenly broke and she dropped it. Maya also suspects it must have been because it's old. Laughing, Rudolf says he understands since the furniture in his room are also very old. Maya casually laughs with him, saying everything has become so worn out. It's only then that Maya realizes she was just laughing with the prince and frantically apologizes to him, especially with the mess that she promises to clean up right after. Shocked, Rudolf asks her to stop apologizing. He does understand, though. He has become an object of fear to them after all. As Maya rushes to get a rag, Rudolf then asks for her name, to which she stutters to say. Now that Rudolf knows her, the prince asks a favor from Maya. Meanwhile, two servants stand guard as Tappel screams at the other servants to hurry up since Rudolf is probably taking a walk, like he always does after a meal. They all need to make sure the ledger matches before he returns. A while after, Rudolf comes barging in the room, angrily telling them they're late, and sarcastically asks how much longer do they intend to make him wait. He got tired of waiting for the ledger and asks them what they're doing right now. Tappel smiles and responds to him how they're only checking the ledger, making sure there are no flaws for the prince to see. And with that, Rudolf gets one of the ledgers from the stockpile the maid is carrying and flips it open. Flipping from one page to another, Rudolf is impressed they did a pretty good job matching the ledger. They had managed to balance the flow of money. But then, taking a closer look at the ledger, Rudolf realizes something and smiles. The prince then informs them that he sees nothing odd in it, to which Tappel says that should be the case since she's properly managing it. Outside, other servants are trying to eavesdrop with what's happening inside. Flipping the ledger open to a certain page, Rudolf points out to the expense made for furnishing and tells them they've spent a lot of money on furnishing. Why? While the other servants look terrified, Tappel sighs as she calmly explains how they're living in a palace. The Emperor has bestowed the Scorpio Palace for Rudolf to manage it. And the most important in managing it is dignity, Tappel says. Furniture that undermines the dignity of the imperial family needs to be replaced, Tappel continues to explain. Rudolf then rephrases his question and asks Tappel if she always replaces the old furniture with new ones. The maid confidently confirms this, saying there's so many things that need to be replaced, they never have enough budget. So Rudolf then asks her, why are there so much old furniture if that's really the case? This is when Tappel starts shaking in fear. Rudolf then points out the furniture in the room. Not only that, but also the ones from the hallways to fixtures. There are lots of old furnishings in this palace, so to speak. Even the ones in the prince's room are worn out. There's no trace of dignity that Tappel highly speaks of. Moving on to the next issue, Rudolf then asks them if they know what he's currently holding. At first glance, this one appears identical to the ledger he saw earlier, but the strange thing is that this one still has half of the budget remaining, which means the one that Rudolf saw earlier, the one that Tappel had given him, is a fake. Sweating, Tappel can't believe this is actually happening and asks the prince who gave him the ledger in his hands. Coincidentally, Maya comes into the room and reveals it was her who found and gave the prince the true ledger. Tappel then screams that it's impossible and calls the ledger that Maya gave a fake. But Maya defends it's the genuine copy, and as proof, Maya shows Tappel the seal of Scorpio Palace stamped on it. It's the seal indicating it as an official document, and only Rudolf himself has the seal that no one can fake. With that, Tappel has no other excuse to say, even her co-conspirators are silent. With a snap of Rudolf's fingers, the guards come barging in, and with the prince's order, they take away all the servants involved in this scheme. Tappel still tries to find a way to wash her dirty laundry and tries pinning the butler to it. She says she was blackmailed by him, but the butler, offended by the accusation, reveals Tappel was the one who pulled everyone into this. Resisting the guards' hold on her, Tappel screams at Rudolf how she's been serving him for 15 years and has been loyal to him since then. Yet, because of one mistake, she's now reduced to nothing. She then vehemently asks the prince if he has no compassion, and if so, he won't die a good death. Rudolf watches and listens to all this unfold. Sighing, he shakes his head. Tappel still tries her best to resist her arrest, pleading for them to release her. On her knees, Tappel desperately calls Rudolf's attention to tell him she knows who poisoned him, as well as who sent the assassin. As the servants watch in shock and the culprits cry in desperation, all they could hear is Tappel for mercy. Turning towards Tappel, Rudolf's cold stare bore into her eyes as he says it was her that sent that assassin. Shock is an understatement best described Tappel's face, as she's also frozen knowing Rudolf knows. Due to the repeated assassination attempts, Rudolf became suspicious towards everything. He killed his brothers and became the emperor, fully relying on Tappel, the only person who stood beside him. The poison and the assassination deliberately made them look attempted, so that Rudolf would become suspicious of everything and would only rely on her. And with that, Tappel is now out of the picture for good. Now that that's gone, Rudolf gets Tappel's brooch from the ground and informs everyone he's going to double-check the ledger since there might still be other fraudulent activities at work. The other servants are now looking frantic, and one by one, they skedaddle as they rush back to work. Seeing their frenzied leave, Rudolf knows there should be fewer fraudulent activities now. Even so, it was still a scary experience for Rudolf. He tried to act like a tyrant, but Rudolf knows he couldn't keep the facade any longer if needed. Let's just say he's been there, done that. Anyways, Rudolf turns to Maya and thanks her for saving him. Although Maya is more than welcome, she's looking rather sad right now. Maybe because she had ousted Tappel and feels guilty about it. The prince then tells her that she'll tend to Rudolf as his personal maid from now on. This shocks Maya, which prompts the prince to further explain. He knows Maya will be treated as a traitor by the other servants because of what happened. If that happens, Maya will eventually lose her position as a new maid. Hearing this, Maya can't help but thank Rudolf for his kindness and promises to do her best. With that, a warm smile forms on Rudolf's face. He's sure he became the cruel emperor because he didn't have any trustworthy allies. He just needs to get more trustworthy allies so that he can change history and live longer. A month later, Rudolf is in the garden and thinking about his plans. Right now, he intends to get a fiancée so he could start his plans on getting more allies. Maya is escorting a lovely lady. They're both headed to where Rudolf is seated. Meanwhile, the prince is breaking sweats from the nervousness he's been feeling. As soon as the lady arrives, she curtsies and introduces herself as the eldest daughter of the Farkrantz family, Lisbeth. Lisbeth then expresses what an honor it is to have been chosen as the prince's fiancée. However, Rudolf looks like he's seen a ghost. Crows begin to caw as the pair sit in silence. Rudolf clenches his hands. This girl is a definite no. If he marries her, he will definitely get killed. Just who is this girl that Rudolf fears? Lustrous black hair that shines like onyx, radiant blue eyes that glisten like aquamarine. She is an otherworldly beauty sitting in front of Rudolf's eyes. But an engagement with Lisbeth would mean inescapable death. Because Rudolf already knows the future 300 years from now. He knows the fate that awaits him and this country. In Rudolf's favorite book, The Epic of Wilhelm, it's been written there that he will later reign as the Dread Emperor and be killed at a young age. And Lisbeth's name was also mentioned in the epic. She's said to be the Frostveil Maiden. It was said that Wilhelm and Lisbeth were deeply in love. They'd fallen for each other when he received a special brooch from her. And after an intense affair, they vowed eternal love for each other. However, someone came along and tore their relationship apart. Rudolf entered the picture and their love was shattered. Filled with grief and despair, Lisbeth closed her heart once again. And in the end, she was the very reason why Rudolf died. With Rudolf's death, the Baltic Empire was destroyed and Wilhelm later founded the Sauvelier Kingdom. That part really doesn't matter to Rudolf. Whatever the case, marrying Lisbeth is definitely a terrible idea. He likes being alive and he's not messing into other people's relationships either. Rudolf then snaps back to reality when Lisbeth calls his attention and comments on his face becoming pale. When asked if something is wrong, Rudolf stutters a reply saying it's nothing. Maya chimes in and tells Lisbeth the prince probably just couldn't sleep since he was so excited about today's meeting. The maid then crouches to whisper in Rudolf. She understands the prince is nervous, but his tea will get cold if he doesn't strike up a conversation at all. The prince had asked his father in helping him search for a fiancée. If Rudolf were to break off this deal, it would be like spitting on the emperor's face. So his best option is to end this engagement in an amicable way. After sipping his tea, Rudolf starts off by saying Lisbeth may have been shocked by the sudden talk of an engagement. As everyone has their own circumstances, he hopes it hasn't proved to be an inconvenience to her. Lisbeth looks cold and distant as she thanks the prince for his considerate words. Of course, she was certainly surprised when she first heard the news, but she sees it as an overwhelming honor. Lisbeth says this with deadpanned eyes that even Rudolf knows she definitely doesn't see it that way. Awkwardly smiling, Rudolf then tells her how it seems like she doesn't wish for an engagement with the likes of Rudolf. In that case, Rudolf suggests if Lisbeth would kindly have her father decline the engagement. Rudolf now realizes Lisbeth may have been forced to participate in this arranged marriage because of the emperor's orders, especially that she already has Wilhelm. Rudolf is hoping she would decline this engagement offer herself, especially that she sees it as too much of an honor. After a moment of silence, Lisbeth assures the prince it's not what he seems and to pay it no mind at all. This should have been the perfect opportunity, but it seems Lisbeth isn't on board with it. Now, Rudolf is doubting if he was too hasty with his offer. A while later, he realizes maybe it's Lisbeth's way of saying do better. Even if she wanted to refuse, she would need a proper reason and stepping stones to do so. So, Rudolf plays along with it, telling Lisbeth he's glad to hear her decision. With that, Rudolf gives her a cheerful smile as he tells Lisbeth he'll take this opportunity to introduce himself. This is Plan A, aka 1,000 Lies. Rudolf tarts off by telling Lisbeth he's the fourth prince of the empire and has been called the most gifted genius since the foundation of the Baltic Empire. Whether it be in academics, imperial studies, or swordsmanship, not a single person could match his incredible prowess. Attracting men and women alike, Rudolf says he is loved by everyone regardless of gender. Everyone in Scorpio Palace even worships him and sings praises to the prince. These are all blatant lies that even Rudolf himself wants to cry for saying such things. But now it wouldn't be strange at all if Lisbeth became disappointed with his pretentiousness and called off the engagement. However, he forgot to add Maya to the equation. The maid chimes in, happily confirming everything Rudolf had said. She then details out how Rudolf managed to address the corruption running rampant in the palace and even saved her from being accused of being a traitor. With that, Maya happily confirms Rudolf is indeed a truly wonderful person. Now Rudolf is sweating from frustration once more as he pleads internally for Maya to read the room. If Plan A isn't working, then let's proceed to Plan B. With that, Plan B. Threats commences. Rudolf then decides to be truthful this time around and tells Lisbeth he has something to tell her. Although he is fourth in line, Rudolf is still eligible to succeed the throne. Therefore, there are people aiming for his life. In fact, just the other day, the prince was just poisoned by a maid and fell into a coma. And when he woke up, Rudolf almost got assassinated. Rudolf then warns Lisbeth that if she marries him, she might get involved in something dangerous. In the prince's mind, he believes this is a good enough reason for Lisbeth to refuse the engagement. However, Lisbeth only calmly asks if there's a problem to any of that. She then tells him that the Falkrentz bloodline has long been called the symbol of the empire's military. That just means Lisbeth herself practices spearmanship. Being scared just because of potential assassins would be an embarrassment to her family. Plan B is no good too. Rudolf needs to think and come up with an even better reason for her to back out. While he's thinking of Plan C, Lisbeth suddenly asks him to share some stories from when he was young. This stuns Rudolf, who grows silent with the question. There isn't a single memory worth mentioning about his childhood after all. But then, the prince touches his pocket, remembering the coin he had placed in it. The prince suddenly remembers her again. The girl who had thanked him for saving her back then, and as a token of her gratitude, the girl had given Rudolf a coin. That coin he got back then, he's still holding on to it till this day. But this is a memory he wants to keep for himself. There's no need to tell Lisbeth about that. When Rudolf only stays silent, Lisbeth calls his attention again. Rudolf still can't think of anything worthy to be told as stories from when he was young. Many of those stories are infamous among the noble. Is Lisbeth trying to make him say them himself so she can laugh at him? Rudolf thinks the woman will probably gossip about it with Wilhelm later. Well, if that's the case, Rudolf will gladly dance to her tune. With that, Rudolf tells her to enjoy his tale, standing up as he talks. This tale is of the ridiculous, idiotic, and miserable comedy of his life. The prince then starts this story with telling Lisbeth a common fact amongst everyone. He is the son of one of the emperor's mistresses. He is an illegitimate child. Normally, Rudolf shouldn't even be eligible to succeed the throne. However, his mother pleaded desperately with the emperor to make Rudolf the fourth prince and such. Maya, who's also listening to the prince's story, expresses her sadness over its beginning. She even says maybe his mother did that out of consideration for his future. But Rudolf had asked his mother a long time ago about why he was born. Rudolf's mother viciously told the prince it was so she could be a part of the imperial family. Rudolf knows he's just insurance for her to continue her luxurious life in the imperial family, even after abandoning him. That's the sole reason for Rudolf's existence. When a new mistress suddenly appears and starts acting like the mother of a prince, the nobles and the members of the royal family will have frowns on their faces. However, they couldn't publicly condemn the mother of a prince either. Therefore, every ridicule, mockery, and abuse went to Rudolf. It wasn't the gossiping or the violence that got him. Being ignored was the most painful of all. Even if he called out to them or asked others for help, no one will even bat an eye at him. Even when Rudolf excelled in swordsmanship or studied hard, no one even cared. Rudolf's biological father, the emperor, and even his own mother. In fact, everyone treated him like he didn't exist, like he shouldn't exist at all. That's why Rudolf did things that they couldn't ignore. The prince would break things on a whim, ask the servants to do impossible tasks for fun and punish them after, and laugh at their suffering. He would break things on a whim, throw a tantrum, curse people out. He would become unreasonably violent at the smallest things. Thus, the tyrant prince was born. Rudolf was so happy. As long as he was like this, everyone would look at him and give him the attention he so badly craved for. Ending his storytelling, silence grew within his two audiences. Rudolf then asked them if they thought it was pretty funny. What is Rudolf actually doing right now? He's just trying to make her Lisbeth hate him. There was no need for him to be so honest. A teary-eyed Maya is the first one to react to his story, calling it cruel for the prince to have been treated like that all this time. Looking at Maya, Rudolf realizes she didn't know the fully story. She did become a maid just recently. With this, Lisbeth will see the prince as a pathetic man who's even pitied by his own servants. There's no way the Frostvale maiden would accept to be engaged to such a pitiful man after that story. Yet the opposite is happening. The stoic face of Lisbeth is now marred with tears, shocking Rudolf in the process. He quickly apologizes for rambling on so long and tries to get a handkerchief from his pocket. However, Rudolf had forgotten about the coin in his pocket, so his actions had the coin clinking on the ground. He quickly stops it from moving, picks it up and puts it back in his pocket. After Rudolf hands Lisbeth the handkerchief, the woman then asks him about the gold coin she just saw a few seconds ago. Rudolf, with his back turned against her, coldly tells Lisbeth it was nothing to do with her. Maya then intervenes to tell them it's about time to wrap things up, so the pair walk back to the palace. Maya still cheers on for Rudolf, even insisting him to hold hands with Lisbeth. While they walk, Rudolf thinks about why Lisbeth was crying just now. Was it so funny that it brought her to tears? Even now, Rudolf can't seem to read what's running inside Lisbeth's mind. Lisbeth's carriage soon arrives. She then thanks the prince for his time today. Rudolf tells her about their engagement, telling her it would be best if she sends a letter with her reply once she's had the time to think it over. He insists she takes her time and consider it carefully. In Rudolf's mind, he thinks it would be easier for her to decline indirectly, and that way they can avoid any confrontations. However, Lisbeth tells him that won't be necessary at all because she accepts the engagement. Rudolf is frozen to the ground as he thinks of one word: why? Bowing down, Lisbeth tells him she's inexperienced, so she kindly asks for his understanding and support. Maya is happy, even shaking Rudolf for this achievement. Rudolf, on the other hand, is beyond confused as to how it came to this. At this rate, he's seriously going to die. While Rudolf is preoccupied, Lisbeth has the chance to approach Maya, and quietly praising her for a job well done. She then tells the maid to continue observing the prince. With that, Maya heeds the maiden's request. 3 days after being officially engaged to Lisbeth, the Frostvile maiden who kills him in the future, Rudolf is still adamant on not dying by her hands. He doesn't really know what she really thinks of him, so Rudolf's best option is to keep his distance to avoid incurring her wrath. That should have been his goal. However, destiny has a sick way of playing with the prince since he's currently seated across her while she's bandaging his wounds. After finishing wrapping his wounds, Lisbeth gets some soup for Rudolf and tells him it had medicinal herbs that will hasten his recovery. Rudolf doesn't want to open his mouth at all. Furthermore, why is Lisbeth in his room in the first place? Rudolf then presses how she doesn't really need to feed him and apologizes for making her worry. Awkwardly chuckling, Rudolf explains how he's a pretty clumsy person and had hurt himself by falling down the stairs. This is nothing as this happens almost all the time. His words are met with silence. Suddenly, a knock comes from the door before Maya comes in with some tea. She then asks Rudolf of the meeting he has with the Emperor today. Maybe he tripped on the stairs in the palace. As Maya serves them the tea, Lisbeth then realizes the prince's words. He had said he fell down the stairs, but it's clearly a lie and those injuries were incurred by someone else. Rudolf only went to see the Emperor, so why did he have to get hurt so badly? Lisbeth then closes in, urging the prince to tell her who did it and why did they assault him like that. To Rudolf, these injuries really aren't that big of a deal. Per usual, he was cornered by his brother and his henchmen. One of them had grabbed Rudolf by the collar and scolded Rudolf for walking in front of the third prince, Robin. Robin watched the whole ordeal with a smirk on his face. He finds Rudolf guilty of defiling his eyes and tells them to discipline the filthy pig. The third prince, Robin, makes Rudolf his personal punching bag every time he sees him. Rudolf has been putting up with it since he was a kid. Assaulting a member of the royal family would normally equate to a serious crime with a death sentence, but it's different with him. Robin then mocks him, telling Rudolf there's not a single person in this palace coming to save him. And although Rudolf doesn't want it to be true, this is his reality. The palace of the Baltic Empire is divided into 13 parts. Rudolf's brothers all live in different ones, each managing their own. This is the kind of thing that happens to Rudolf if he steps out of his Scorpio palace. The henchman then sarcastically asks if Rudolf has learned his place now. But the fourth prince only spits on the man's face, then smirking at him, angering the man in the process. Without ado, the man punches Rudolf straight in the face. Robin laughs while watching Rudolf getting beaten up, telling the man to leave Rudolf's face at least. Rudolf doesn't want Lisbeth to know anything more about his life at the palace, so he tries to lie and tells her that's not what happened and not to worry about it anymore. Lisbeth is saddened with his response, and although a part of Rudolf is somehow persuaded, he knows she will eventually become an enemy who will aim for his life, so he can't open his heart to Lisbeth. Maya then intervenes, telling Lisbeth that the prince is trying to tell her how he's dealt with the ruffians who dared oppose him, and these are only honorable wounds, so his honey doesn't need to worry. Maya even poses for added effect. Rudolf frantically screams at Maya, embarrassed by her words and that silly impression of him. With arms on her waist, Maya then points out how the prince was the one who caught Tappel red-handed before. There's no way he'd go down without a fight, and Maya is sure he had some kind of plan. That leaves Rudolf in a still. A plan? She's kinda right. After Rudolf received a good beating, Robin's henchman had asked him if he had learned his lesson. Robin then sees this as wasting a lot of time, so he tells them they'll go now. While they're walking away, Rudolf gets up with shaking legs. He then mentions about being late for his appointment with their father. This caught Robin's attention, who's now scared with what they've heard. Suddenly, the head butler appears and asks what in the world is happening. Now, Robin and his goons are even more scared. After all, the head butler is the direct attendant of the Emperor. The head butler then approaches Rudolf to ask if he's okay. Turning to Robin, the head butler informs the third prince there's no running away from this one. Robin has injured Rudolf's face and, consequently, the Emperor's reputation. Scared is now an understatement. Robin reasons out how it was just a quarrel between brothers and happens from time to time. The head butler, ushering Rudolf to see the Emperor, tells Robin he'll listen to his excuses later. As they walk away, Rudolf turns slightly towards Robin, giving him a smirk. Robin is then left feeling furious with this whole ordeal. It was worth manipulating them into hitting Rudolf's face and dragging out the fight. Rudolf knew that the head butler would come if there was a delay with the Emperor's appointment. Rudolf is different now. With his knowledge of the future and the experience of his past life, Rudolf will surely survive to the very end. He couldn't care less about Robin. Right now, Rudolf needs to figure out what Lisbeth is thinking. As he continues to stare at her, Rudolf's fear grows even more. I mean, look at her eyes. Rudolf's even startled when Lisbeth gets up and approaches him to ask how the meeting with the Emperor went. Lisbeth is also curious if the Emperor said anything about their engagement. When Rudolf arrived in front of the Emperor, he kneeled to apologizes for being late. The Emperor then pays it no mind and praises Rudolf for handling the engagement smoothly. Although this is supposed to be a formal meeting, the Emperor has a mistress seated on his lap, who's telling the Emperor to leave Rudolf so they can have more fun together. The Emperor then tells Beatrice how she's such a hopeless woman, the same hopeless woman who's actually Rudolf's mother. Rudolf then stands up, thanking his father and helping him with his engagement. The Emperor is then angry that Rudolf is still there and dismisses him, even reminding the prince to know his place. Going back to the current timeline, Rudolf assures his fiancée it was just the usual meeting with his father. Like he said, there's no way he can open his heart to Lisbeth. Changing the subject, he then tells her how he's surprised to see Lisbeth here when he got back and asks why she had come. Lisbeth casually replies that she only meant to visit the prince. Seeing Rudolf's confused face, Lisbeth asks if it's strange to be concerned about how her fiancé is doing. Rudolf stutters out a reply, but inside he wants Lisbeth to stop saying stuff that makes his heart race. He then reminds himself he's the enemy. Repeatedly. Asking about his wounds again, Lisbeth is curious if he gets hurt like this often. She's just worried for her fiancé. And with that, Lisbeth informs Rudolf she's be visiting his room every day from now on. Rudolf awkwardly laughs, stating every day is a bit over the top. But then Maya chimes in, telling him she's also worried about him as his maid. With that, Lisbeth has decided on this and Rudolf can't disagree further. Rudolf now feels like he's getting cornered bit by bit, like a prey waiting for its predator to eat him alive. Meanwhile, at Falkrant's mansion, Lisbeth is thanking Maya for acting as Rudolf's personal maid. Because of that, Lisbeth was able to get closer to the prince. She then urges the maid to continue with her work. Maya agrees, heeding the maiden's request once more. Now alone, Lisbeth starts giggling, and not long she starts fantasizing about Rudolf, praising him for his lovely, dignified figure, and those amber eyes and gentle voice that melts her body and soul. Lisbeth seems to have forgotten that Maya is still in the room. The maid calls her attention, reminding the maiden her feelings are showing on her face right now. Maya then gives her a piece of advice. If Lisbeth really loves him that much, she should act a bit warmer to him. Because Maya can tell Rudolf's confused. Now Lisbeth is tear-eyed as she's worried if she seemed unfriendly. Smiling, Maya describes Lisbeth as being a statue wearing her poker face all the time. All the instances she had met the prince, she had never once smiled at him. Lisbeth's expressions and words were also ice cold. It was just really off-putting. Lisbeth then screams how she can't really do anything about it. She's had a crush on him since forever. Yup, we're all shocked with Lisbeth's confession, to think this is the same Frostvale maiden set to kill Rudolf. Anyways, Lisbeth then explains how she gets so nervous when she's near Rudolf and her mind goes blank, and every time she tries to talk, her face tenses up. That explains the stoic expressions. Maya seemingly sighs. Lisbeth seems so confident, but she never knew the maiden is shy at heart. Even more, she can't believe Lisbeth decided to visit the palace every day with the way she's shy. Shaking her head, Maya praises the maiden for doing well and mustering up her courage to say that. But the maid is also worried about what will happen. Lisbeth then turns to get the spear mounted on the wall, telling Maya she doesn't need courage to visit Rudolf every day. After all, she can't forgive how her fiancé has been treated so terribly. She can't forgive those who have hurt him, nor can she forgive herself for living on without knowing this until now. With that, Lisbeth vows to stay at Rudolf's side to protect him and turn those fools into rust on this glaive. Maya urges Lisbeth to calm down a bit, informing her that the one who hurt Rudolf this time was most likely the third prince. However, Robin won't come to the Scorpio Palace, and this incident was an exception, so she insists Lisbeth put her dangerous weapon away. Maya proudly shares how no one in the Scorpio Palace has been disrespectful towards Rudolf ever since the Tapple incident. Those kind of people have been eliminated by Rudolf's personal maid, aka Maya. Putting Maya in a headlock, Lisbeth demands an answer for the maid's smug face. She's jealous, of course. Lisbeth wants to become a special person to the prince too. Poor Maya, though. Something clicks in Lisbeth's head, asking about her own reason why she's going to visit Rudolf every day. Maya starts giggling and confirms Lisbeth's theory. Lisbeth doesn't need to protect Rudolf at all, so she's not going to go there and guard him. Instead, it's to have a date with him. Screaming, Lisbeth runs away, saying she can't do it. Maya quickly grabs her and encourages the maiden that she can. Now Maya has Lisbeth on a headlock, pressing her to get comfy and talking to Rudolf ASAP, especially that day is approaching. At the mention of it, Lisbeth calms down, remembering what's happening in a week. It's her birthday party. Blushing, Lisbeth thinks of her upcoming celebration. She's already thinking of dancing with Rudolf. Right now, she's about to faint from both happiness and nervousness. Understanding Maya's concerns, Lisbeth promises to do her best. Now that that's discussed, Maya then gives Lisbeth some payback for earlier and squats on the maiden. Sigh, these two. Meanwhile, Rudolf is laying on his bee thinking if Lisbeth is the same Frostvale maiden that was in the Epic of Wilhelm. Rudolf knows something is off. Lisbeth sure is icy, but she didn't seem to just be meeting Rudolf out of obligation. Both the downfall of Tapple and his search for a fiancé didn't happen in the future's history. Is the future changing because of his actions? Rudolf feels like that's not the case at all. And even if he tried avoiding Lisbeth, she will chase after him on her own. Could it be that he's heading towards a timeline wherein he really marries Lisbeth? It's a wild guess, but if marrying Lisbeth is an unavoidable event, then is Rudolf's death also an unavoidable event? Meanwhile, at another mansion, a man remembers it's going to be Lisbeth's birthday soon. He promises to come and pick her up by and make her his without fail. Wilhelm von Sauvalier, second son of the Sauvalier family, toasts his promise to the moon as he drinks the night away. The next day, Rudolf and Lisbeth both have some tea in the garden again. Rudolf seems distracted as he thinks of a way for him to live through this. Maya, seeing his face, calls his attention, telling him that Lisbeth was actually talking to him. It's only then that Rudolf learns about Lisbeth's upcoming birthday party. Back in his room, he tells Maya he won't be going to the party, but the maid reminds him that it's a party hosted by his fiancée, and going to it with a woman outside his family would also be considered rude. Rudolf was actually hoping Maya could accompany him, but it seems he has no choice. He then asks Maya to prepare something for him beforehand. When Maya asks what it is, Rudolf whispers it to her ear. Soon, Maya's face starts blushing and assures the prince she'll indubitably bring him what he desires. Rudolf has decided to charm Lisbeth with all he's got at her birthday party. That day soon arrives. Rudolf is then welcomed in the Falkrantz household by Lisbeth's cheerful mom Teresa and her scary-looking father Marquis Douglas Falkrantz. Bowing slightly, Rudolf politely thanks them for inviting him today. Inside, he's already shaking upon seeing the Marquise's scary face. Teresa then takes Rudolf up to Lisbeth's room, telling her daughter the prince has arrived. With a smirk on his face, Rudolf is confident as he came fully prepared to make Lisbeth fall for him. However, Rudolf is taken aback with the lovely sight before him. He can't help but stare at her, seemingly in a loss for words. Lisbeth then curtsies, thanking her fiancé for coming today. Rudolf stutters as he tells her the pleasure is all his. Giggling, Teresa informs them there's still plenty of time before the party starts, so he urges the pair to make themselves comfortable together. The two are now met with awkward silence. Rudolf himself has lost all his confidence earlier. He can't even remember what he was supposed to say. The topics he had prepared are now gone. The two then coincidentally make the move to strike up a conversation, making things even more awkward. The prince then insists Lisbeth go first, but the maiden also wants Rudolf to talk first. Well, now they're just staring at each other awkwardly. Blushing and stuttering, Rudolf praises his fiancée for looking beautiful. Blushing, a smile forms on Lisbeth's face as she expresses her happiness with his comment. She then tells him he looks very elegant. Lisbeth then blushes so hard she had to cover her face with both her hands. This makes Rudolf doubt even more if she's really the Frostveil maiden Lisbeth. Looking at her now, she's so different from the Lisbeth that appeared in the epic. And also, wasn't she supposed to be in love with Wilhelm? Remembering his gift, Rudolf rummages through his pocket as he tells Lisbeth he has something to give her. Right then and there, Wilhelm barges into the room greeting Lisbeth. Wilhelm then compliments the maiden on how even more beautiful she looked than usual. Both Rudolf and Lisbeth are shocked to see their intruder who's still not done talking. Wilhelm expresses his worry since he hasn't heard from Lisbeth lately. He's glad Lisbeth is doing well and tells her how they're both fated to be together. Rudolf has been mentioning this dude for a while now. This is Wilhelm in the flesh, the protagonist in the epic of Wilhelm and the hero revered through the generations. He's also Lisbeth's lover. It takes Wilhelm a long while before he notices Rudolf in the room and quickly corners him. He smugly asks the prince he can't bother reading the room. Wilhelm doesn't know who he is, but he asks Rudolf to get out of their way. Rudolf now thinks Wilhelm and Lisbeth really are in love with each other. In the end, Rudolf was just being led on by her. Rudolf now feels like he's such a fool. However, Lisbeth approaches them and removes Wilhelm's hand. With scary eyes, she then warns Wilhelm not to touch Rudolf ever again. Even Wilhelm was scared with that warning. After composing herself, Lisbeth then denies whatever Wilhelm had said about being fated together. She then accuses him of defiling her precious memories, calling him a swindler. Now standing in front of Rudolf, Lisbeth commands Wilhelm to get away from her fiancé. When Wilhelm seems confused, Lisbeth angrily informs him she is engaged to Rudolf. This makes Wilhelm angry, of course. Watching this whole spectacle, Rudolf realizes Lisbeth wasn't in love with Wilhelm. If anything, she actually hated him. This doesn't even look like an ordinary lover's quarrel. So, question is, what happened between them? When Rudolf recalls what Lisbeth has said about defiling her precious memories, the prince remembers it was mentioned in the epic too. Those were her memories from when she was still a child. Rudolf was bullying Lisbeth and Wilhelm was there to rescue her from the prince. After saving her, Lisbeth had given Wilhelm a brooch as a way of saying thank you, and even promised to meet again. As a result, they were reunited again after nearly 10 years. It was one of the most popular arcs among women. Now that Rudolf thinks about it, he has never done anything like that. He wasn't even a tyrant 10 years ago. The historians probably just dramatized everything after the fact. Wilhelm then asks Lisbeth if she remembers what she had asked him before in her letter. "What did I give you on the day that we met?" Wilhelm then reveals it how he does remember. Touching the brooch on his neck, Wilhelm tells her it was that brooch. However, Lisbeth denies it being a brooch, shocking the two men in the process. Wilhelm presses it was definitely a brooch that was given to him. But now Lisbeth is furious as she tells him she doesn't want to listen to his excuses anymore. She's been deceived by him all the while. She never wants to see Wilhelm's face ever again. Clenching his fists, Wilhelm turns away and tells her he'll leave, but just for today. After Wilhelm leaves, Rudolf can't seem to wrap his head around what just happened. This is too different from the history he knows of. Did his actions rewrite history? But he knows that's not the case. The past shouldn't be affected by his actions, which means the story about the brooch was fabricated by historians. They probably exaggerated the relationship between the two to make it more sensational. To that end, they even claimed that Rudolf had treated Lisbeth roughly in the past. Come to think if, Wilhelm is pursuing Lisbeth, but the maiden just introduced him as her fiancé. To Wilhelm, Rudolf is the guy who stole Lisbeth from him, just like in the history Rudolf knows of. Even if he didn't become the emperor, Rudolf might get assassinated by Wilhelm, who hates him so much. This situation is too dangerous to leave alone, but it's still not too late for him to end the engagement. With that, Rudolf asks Lisbeth as to what her relationship with Wilhelm is. But seeing Lisbeth's tearful face, Rudolf second-guesses his decision. Lisbeth then apologizes for the trouble earlier. Sighing, Lisbeth understands where Rudolf's concern is coming from. Lisbeth stares at him with such a sad face. She can't seem to have herself answer the prince's question. All Rudolf has to do now is press on the question. If the two go a long way back, the prince can actually just say he's canceling their engagement. However, different words come out of his mouth. Instead, Rudolf urges her to tell him everything. Judging by the way Lisbeth is acting, it doesn't seem as simple as a past lover chasing after her. So the prince wants to know what happened between her and that man. Rudolf actually doesn't know why he's saying all this, but he already knows why. It's because of Lisbeth's expression. It's exactly the same as the one he used to make, full of anxiety, fear, and agitation. That's what he can tell by her face. Lisbeth wants to share her story, but is scared he would be disappointed in her. And she realized that it wouldn't go over well. That face she's making right now is an expression of despair. A face Rudolf doesn't want Lisbeth to make. Suddenly, Lisbeth hugs the prince and tells him how he hasn't changed at all. With that, they sit on the ground as Lisbeth asks the prince to listen to her story. Lisbeth's precious memories that were defiled by Wilhelm happened 9 years ago. When she was 5 years old, Lisbeth's dad took her to the imperial palace. Lisbeth had cheerfully ran upon seeing the pretty flowers. Her father had asked her not to run too fast or she'll trip. Moments later, Lisbeth does trip, worrying her dad in the process. After assuring him she's fine, Lisbeth stands up and tells him she's okay because she has this amulet that he had given her. With that, the Marquis takes his daughter into his arms for a hug. The first Falkrantz Lord was said to have carried a certain amulet all throughout his feats of war. It's a family tradition to always keep a copy close at hand. As long as it's with her, Lisbeth's wishes will be granted. So Lisbeth promises to take good care of it. Seated, Lisbeth is then told to stay in the room and read a bit until her father comes back, since has to discuss an important matter for now. However, Lisbeth got bored and sneaked out of the room. She strolls around the palace looking for the garden, but then she got lost in the process. A while later, she hears a little boy saying he's never seen her before, and didn't she know all intruders are put to death? This kid is actually Prince Robin when he was young. His butler back then had warned the prince that Lisbeth might be the daughter of their guest, judging by her clothes. But Robin tells him to shut up. Robin then looks at Lisbeth evilly as he tells her he's been looking for someone to test his swordsmanship skills he learned yesterday. So he orders his men to capture Lisbeth, but the men are already hesitating to do so, giving Lisbeth some time to run and escape. Lisbeth can still hear Robin scolding his men to get her, so she runs faster. Turning to a corner, someone suddenly grabs her hand and ushers her inside the room. Robin and his men frantically look for her. Robin already warns them he'll make them his carriage for a week if they lose her. Meanwhile, Lisbeth looks at her savior with fear in her eyes. She then asks why this boy is helping her. But the little boy only tells her to be quiet and assures her not to worry, especially that those men are after her. A warm smile splays on the little boy's face as he assures Lisbeth no one will come inside the room and that she'll be safe. As the little boy looks outside, he sees that it's all clear now and asks Lisbeth where was she trying to go. After telling the little boy about the garden, he gladly takes her there. Lisbeth is in awe of the place and asks if she can pick some of the flowers, to which he agrees to. So the two played in the garden and even made flower crowns. Then the little boy spots Robin and his men, so he quickly pushed Lisbeth towards the bushes and tells her to stay quiet and to don't come out. After a while, Robin, who's riding his butler's back like a horse, comes to see who it was in the garden. Upon seeing the little boy, his face etches in anger, mocking the fourth prince as to why someone like him is allowed in the garden. The little boy stays quiet as Robin smirks his brother for being such a nice guy. Calling the little boy a pig, Robin then asks if he has seen a girl around the same age as him. Again, the little boy stays silent. But after a while, he tells Robin he hasn't seen anyone. With that, Robin gets off the butler's back and punches the little boy right in the face. The poor boy is sent flying to the ground. Scared, Lisbeth tries her best to keep herself quiet by having her hand on her mouth. Robin then tells the little boy how there's something off about him and a piece of trash like him would lie so easily. Robin then orders his men to hold the little boy down. While they do so, Robin repeatedly punches and kicks him. He's not going to stop until the little boy tells him where Lisbeth is. Crying, Lisbeth remains in hiding, shaking as she waits for the beating to be done. Sometime later, they hear the noon bell ring, signaling for lunchtime. Without gaining anything from the little boy, Robin tells them they'll go now. The little boy is left wounded on the ground. As he struggles to get up, Lisbeth asks him if he's okay. The little boy weakly laughs as he assures her he's used to the bullying and apologizes for pushing Lisbeth earlier. The little boy then asks if Lisbeth is hurt. Although she's not physically wounded, Lisbeth is shaking as she cries. A wounded boy then asks why she's crying. Then Lisbeth starts wailing as she tells him anyone would cry if they heard him say he's used to being hit. The little boy only scratches the back of his head and smiles, telling Lisbeth he never thought there'd be someone who'd cry for him. This is actually the first time that's happened. Once Lisbeth calms down, she then gets something from her pocket. As thank you for saving her, Lisbeth gives the little boy a gold coin. Upon seeing it, the little boy asks her if she's sure since it's a very beautiful gold coin. Lisbeth then shares how her dad told her about her wishes coming true if she has this coin. Clutching it in his chest, the little boy gives her a smile as he thanks her for the coin. He then tells her how one of his wishes already came true. When asked what it was, the little boy reveals it's Lisbeth noticing him. After that, a servant had found them and the little boy had ran away and disappeared. Lisbeth was then let out of the garden without a chance to ask for the little boy's name. Listening to all this, Rudolf can't believe everything Lisbeth had said. That can't be true. The girl he met in the Imperial Palace 9 years ago and who gave him his gold coin amulet. There's no way that girl is Lisbeth. 10 years later, Lisbeth will become the Frostveil Maiden and kill Rudolf. How is this all possible? After that, Lisbeth shares how she was scolded harshly by her father, and once again she had received a gold coin of the same kind that Lisbeth had given to the boy. Getting it from her pocket, Lisbeth shows Rudolf her coin and asks if the prince has the same kind. Rudolf stares at the coin in Lisbeth's hand with widened eyes. He then fetches his coin from his pocket and both of them compare each other's, confirming that they were indeed the same little girl and boy who met 9 years ago. With that, Rudolf starts crying. In times of struggle, hardship, and in pain, in the moments when he felt like he might break, the coin had given him strength. Rudolf quickly gives Lisbeth a tight hug as he tells her how the coin and his memories of her kept him sane and alive. He then thanks her for saving him and for paying attention to him. A smile forms on Lisbeth's face as tears begun to form as well. She feels the same way as she always wanted to express her gratitude to him. After they shared this moment, they both unclasped from their hug. Rudolf then tells his fiancée that it's time for the party now. As the two tidy themselves up, Lisbeth shares how she really forgot it's her birthday party. Before Rudolf opens the door for them to leave, he remembers his question from earlier and asks Lisbeth what her relationship is with Wilhelm. Sighing, Lisbeth tells him Wilhelm is proof of her stupidity. Meanwhile, Wilhelm is walking the hallways as he thinks of Rudolf. He can't be wrong. At this rate, Lisbeth will marry Rudolf, but it's fine. After all, Wilhelm knows the prince will die at her hands. That is the history that will unfold. There's no future for Rudolf, Wilhelm says. So there's another person who knows the history of the future. Lisbeth isn't planning on hiding things from Rudolf, so she promises to tell him everything. She had met Wilhelm at a certain party hosted around a year ago. Boys had fallen to their knees just to ask Lisbeth to dance with them. Not just boys at that, even grown old men. With furrowed brows, Lisbeth had told them to get out of her face. At that time, Lisbeth was getting close to the end of her hope. She couldn't hire a spy or investigator until she was an adult, and before she knew it, 8 years had passed without being able to meet the little boy in her memories. That was when Wilhelm had approached her, telling her how he's longed to meet her and even called her his destined soulmate. Wilhelm had presented Lisbeth with a rose too. Confused, Lisbeth asked him who he was and pointedly tells him she's not interested in shallow men with the stench of dishonesty. Scratching his head, Wilhelm jokingly calls Lisbeth's words harsh. Then he asks her if she's forgotten what had happened 8 years ago on that day in the Imperial Garden where the white jasmine bloomed so beautifully. Wilhelm then tells her they had played together for a blissful moment in that said garden. This shocks Lisbeth. She can't believe this is the little boy from her memories, especially that his hair color is different from back then. But Wilhelm had told her that he's the only one whose hair color differs from his family members. Because of that, many rumors sprang up over the years, so he had to dye it red to quiet them down. When Lisbeth hears this, she still doubts Wilhelm's words, so she had asked what was his original hair color. Wilhelm had given her a vague answer, saying it's the same color as when he had met her. With that, he bows down and tells her once more how he's longed for this day, calling her his destined soulmate. Lisbeth's eyes began to water as she took Wilhelm's story as the truth. Lisbeth's longing to meet Rudolf was so strong that it had clouded her judgment and ended up trusting Wilhelm blindly. Since that day, she's been meeting with Wilhelm regularly, though Lisbeth does say it's only once a month for tea. Rudolf's face morphs into one in annoyance. He's not really sure why, but Wilhelm just made it to the top of his hate list right now. Seeing Rudolf's face, Lisbeth cries as she thinks the prince must be disappointed in her. She then points out how she was really stupid to ever trust a liar like Wilhelm. Rudolf quickly assures Lisbeth that's not the case at all and he's not mad at her at all. That aside, it doesn't make sense to Rudolf as to why Wilhelm had told her about the story of how Rudolf and Lisbeth met. In the background, Lisbeth is still trying to explain herself, noting how at that time, Wilhelm's eye color is the only thing that was the same with the little boy she had met. Aside from that, everything else was completely different. His hair color, texture, gaze, and even the shape of his mouth. Lisbeth is very annoyed with herself. If she could go back to the past, she'd tear her past self to pieces with her glaive. Hearing this, Rudolf awkwardly laughs as he tells her it's fine and urges her to continue with what she was saying earlier. So Lisbeth continued with her story. At that time, she had foolishly trusted Wilhelm. However, the more she spoke with him, the more she felt something was really wrong. Her gut feeling had been tingling and screaming at her. So Lisbeth finally asked her about the thing she gave him that fateful day. Lisbeth had even asked Wilhelm if he didn't hold it dear enough to carry it around with him. Wilhelm grows silent. It takes a long while and for Lisbeth to call his attention for him to actually answer. He apologizes and tells her it's the other way around as he thinks his memories of Lisbeth are far too precious to him. Hence why Wilhelm has kept it well protected to make sure it doesn't get damaged. Since then, Lisbeth had asked him several times about it, but he always dodged the question, and her doubts grew deeper and deeper. It was at that time that Maya had raised her hand. Although she doesn't like to impose on the issue, but the maid is curious if Wilhelm is really the boy from Lisbeth's memories. Maya is well aware many years have passed, but Wilhelm still seemed very different from Lisbeth's story. As soon as Lisbeth honestly says she can't be sure herself, Maya then tells her the real boy from Lisbeth's memories should still be somewhere out there, if Wilhelm really is lying. So Maya suggests she'll infiltrate the palace where Lisbeth had met the little boy. Maybe by then they'll find a lead. This has Lisbeth interested as she sees this as a great idea. She then asks Maya if the maid can really pull this off, to which Maya readily agrees, even promising to accomplish this mission. At this point of the story, Rudolf calls time out to ask if Maya is really Lisbeth's agent. He's so surprised since he never knew this detail beforehand. Seeing Rudolf's shocked face has Lisbeth realizing this, and she gasps in surprise too. After awkwardly apologizing, Rudolf assures her he's not mad about it at all. Rudolf then asks her if Maya was the only one Lisbeth had told about their meeting. After she nods yes, Rudolf asks if there was anyone else that heard the story by chance. However, Lisbeth is sure that's an impossible thing to happen. Maya has been her maid and bodyguard since she was little. If there was a rat around, Lisbeth is sure Maya would have definitely sensed it. Hearing this, Rudolf sees Maya as a more capable servant than he had initially expected. However, if Maya is the only one who knows, then where did Wilhelm learn about their past? Of course, Rudolf didn't tell anyone else either. Going back to the story, Lisbeth then continues on with Maya finally infiltrating the imperial palace. The maid had seen Rudolf staring fondly at a gold coin and had suspected that the prince might be the little boy from Lisbeth's memories. Then, at the engagement meeting, Lisbeth had confirmed that Rudolf was indeed the little boy she had remembered. Rudolf understands this part since the gold coin did fall out of his pocket at that time. He did try to hide it, but Lisbeth seemed to have saw it. So that's why Lisbeth accepted the engagement immediately, making the prince comment on how fast her decision was. As for Wilhelm, Lisbeth had Maya deliver a letter to cut her ties with him. At that time, Maya confirmed her theory once more. Wilhelm had violently asked what was the meaning of the letter. Maya politely told him, as stated in the letter, Lisbeth will have no further meetings with Wilhelm anymore. Wilhelm can't seem to accept this decision, especially that he thinks it's a hasty one. So, Maya had asked him the same question Lisbeth had asked him before. What was the thing that the maiden had given him that day? Wilhelm pointedly told Maya he had received a brooch from Lisbeth. Smiling, Maya tells him she understands before taking her leave. Once outside, Maya's smile soon disappears as she's now 100% sure Wilhelm was lying and had been deceiving Lisbeth. Now Rudolf is really bothered by the fact that Wilhelm knows some details of what happened. Some of it, but not everything. What if he was also at the palace that day and saw them playing in the garden? This might be one of the possible scenarios, Rudolf thinks. Wilhelm might have seen that Lisbeth had given him something but not enough to see what it was. So he always dodged the question, and at that last moment Wilhelm answered a brooch in desperation. There are still things that bother Rudolf, but for now, this is the only explanation that makes sense. More importantly, why would Wilhelm do that though? The Falkranz Marquis family is the symbol of military power. For aristocrats and royalty wanting to dominate the empire, their strength is something to be desired above all else. Marrying Lisbeth would mean gaining the support of the Falkrantz family. In fact, in the epic, after the death of the dread Emperor Rudolf, the Falkrantz family had supported Wilhelm in destroying the Baltic Empire and had created a new kingdom. Rudolf's question is, could it be that Wilhelm's scheme also involved having Lisbeth assassinate the prince? Rudolf is brought back to reality when he hears Lisbeth crying out, thinking he might be disappointed with her. In a foolish woman like her, assuring her, Rudolf tells her that's not the case. It's the man who used and trampled on their memories who's at fault. Hearing his words, Lisbeth finally calms down. Rudolf then tells her to forget about that man, especially that today is Lisbeth's birthday party. With that, the two leave the room to finally celebrate her birthday party. Entering the venue together, all the guests are stunned to see the pair. Although they praise Lisbeth for being as beautiful as ever, Rudolf is receiving the opposite. They're all calling him the tyrant prince. They're also criticizing as to why Lisbeth would be with someone like him. These criticisms are because Rudolf's engagement to Lisbeth hasn't been formally announced yet. The prince doesn't know why, but this was the emperor's decision. After a while, Lisbeth informs her fiancé she needs to go and greet some of her guests. Now alone, Rudolf thinks this is better so he won't stir up any rumors. Right now, his goal is to be a fly on the wall. Meanwhile, Lisbeth is doing her duties as the celebrant. She's curtsying important guests and even snubbing the men vying for her attention. The orchestra soon starts playing and people are starting to head to the center to dance. Rudolf has always been alone at parties like this one. This is actually the first time he's paying attention. Now he's in a dilemma since the only dances he knows are those from village festivals, 300 years from now. The instruments and tempo are completely different, so his knowledge is pretty much useless. If someone invites him to dance, Rudolf will have to come up with an excuse to decline. But then, a familiar song starts playing. And not long after, Lisbeth approaches him. Blushing, she asks the prince if he's not going to invite her to dance. Rudolf is now sweating from the pressure. Shaking, Rudolf turns his back on Lisbeth as he quietly informs her he's never actually danced before. However, Lisbeth only smiles and tells him he shouldn't worry about such trivial matters. With that, Lisbeth asks to be the prince's first partner. Now Rudolf is frantic. He doesn't even say anything as Lisbeth assures him not to worry since she'll show him what to do. With that, the two clasp hands and start dancing. Lisbeth leads the way, even telling the prince not to slouch and to listen to the music so he could follow the rhythm. The other nobles then watch the pair dance, mocking them and calling it a kid's dance. The man, annoyed that Lisbeth is with the tyrant prince, suddenly gets a bright idea. After asking the vindictive noblewoman to dance, they forcibly get near Lisbeth and Rudolf to bump on the prince. Such act was so uncalled for that Rudolf tripped. The nobleman even acted as if he's apologetic but then walked away like it's nothing, even grinning at the noblewoman he was dancing with. That's when Rudolf sees and hears everything they've all been talking about. They're telling him how a person like him is not worthy of being with Lisbeth. They're even mocking him for not knowing how to dance properly, calling him a filthy pig. Rudolf's eyes are filled with despair, but then Lisbeth's happy face blocks those thoughts as she asks Rudolf for another dance. Now Rudolf is doubting if he can really be with her like this. To them, Lisbeth is a high-class flower and he's just the palace's outcast. No matter how far he goes, this reality will never change. All the other guests are still whispering, laughing as they see Rudolf dancing off the beat. Not only that, Rudolf knows the Marquis clearly dislikes him. Lady Teresa may have welcomed him, but he's not really sure what her opinion of him really is. Such thoughts can't escape his mind now, and Lisbeth herself can also feel it dripping. Should Rudolf just become the emperor like in history? Suddenly, Lisbeth shouts Rudolf's formal title, causing Rudolf to snap back to reality. As he gazes at Lisbeth, he can only see a warm smile on her face as she tells him he's supposed to look at his partner's face when dancing. With that, Rudolf's despair is no more. After apologizing, they both try dancing once more. This time, Rudolf stares back at Lisbeth as the clasp hands again. She's always been looking only at him, so he shouldn't look away from her at all. Rudolf's words plus his hand on her back has Lisbeth blushing red. This is now a different Rudolf they're all seeing. Now the pair are matching the rhythm and are actually dancing properly. Everyone's surprised. Maybe they were deceived by what they saw earlier. Everyone knows it is extremely difficult for a beginner to synchronize their breathing in a dance. Therefore, it is a fundamental rule for the experienced one to lead. Earlier, Lisbeth was the one doing so, but right now it's Prince Rudolf who's synchronizing the breathing. Even the Marquis may be a bit impressed. It really doesn't show on his face, but let's just hope for the best. The noblewoman who was mocking Rudolf earlier is now calling him cool. Wow, what a fast change of heart. Rudolf and Lisbeth are very much happy as they dance to the beat of the song. All those worries earlier are long gone. Right now all they see each other's smiles, and that's clearly more than enough. After the song, they bow down to everyone watching. Rudolf then sits down on a nearby chair, panting. He had managed to finish the dance without stepping on Lisbeth's feet. At the very least, he didn't embarrass her during the dance. Lisbeth then approaches a sweating Rudolf to praise him for being wonderful. She wouldn't have guessed it was really his first time dancing. A shy Rudolf thanks her especially for leading the way. Then Lisbeth sees how tired the prince looks, so she goes away to get him something to drink. Left alone again, Rudolf thinks about the memory of the village festival dance from the future. He really thought it wouldn't be helpful, but when he calmed down and thought about it, there wasn't much of a difference. While the instruments and tempo were different, the melody, rhythm, and steps were really quite similar. This has Rudolf thinking maybe the dance of the nobles of this era changed over 300 years later and spread as the dance performed at village festivals by commoners. Thanks to that, Rudolf had managed to get by. Sighing a breath of relief, the prince assures himself he can do it. Even if history says he'll die as the Dread Emperor, Rudolf is determined to rewrite it into a small, happy history where he stays with Lisbeth forever. A while after his internal monologue, the Marquis approaches the prince to ask for a moment to speak with him. The Marquis's intense aura has Rudolf sweating in fear. Lisbeth's father then apologizes for not properly greeting the prince earlier. Marquis Douglas doesn't look happy at all. Rudolf then politely tells Marquis Douglas he shouldn't be apologizing. In fact, the prince thinks he should be the one apologizing to the Marquis. Meanwhile, Lisbeth is still on high from her dance with her fiancé. She's so happy at the same time shocked to see such a serious look on Rudolf's face midway through the dance. Lisbeth felt like she might get lost in those amber eyes. Suddenly, Lisbeth remembers she needs to go back and quickly gets a glass of drink from the table. As she hands the fruit water to the prince, she's shocked to hear her father asking her fiancé for a match. Both Lisbeth and Rudolf stare at the Marquis with shock evident on their faces, so they move to outside in the family's training area. Along with the Marquis Douglas and Rudolf are Teresa and Lisbeth. The Marquis then tells the prince how this sparring will also count as training. When the Marquis hands the prince a wooden sword, Rudolf takes it and stares at it. It's his first time holding a wooden sword. Rudolf realizes it's actually heavier than he initially thought. The Marquis, who notices Rudolf staring at him, then asks if something's wrong. Rudolf is actually staring at the Marquis's wooden sword and comments on how it looks like it's been used for years. As the Marquis removes his formal jacket, he confirms the prince's words and reveals he's been swinging the wooden sword 1,000 times a day since he was a child. It's now a part of the Marquis's daily routine. Seeing Marquis Douglas in his fighting stance has Rudolf thinking of one word: death. Even Lisbeth looks worried while standing on the sides. This intimidating pressure from the Marquis just proves how much he really disapproves of Lisbeth and Rudolf's engagement. Rudolf believes it's most likely because his father, the Emperor, may have forced Marquis Douglas to give his daughter to the prince. The prince did tell his father how he wanted a wife. This may have triggered Marquis Douglas's rage, especially knowing it's the tyrant prince who's going to marry his beloved daughter. Now Rudolf's overthinking things, believing the Marquis is planning on making it look like an accident during training so no one can blame him for what happens. The thought sends shivers down Rudolf's body. Surely the Marquis doesn't think like that, right? Lisbeth suddenly gets in between the two, telling her father not to do this to her fiancé. Lisbeth knows her father is the Empire's strongest warrior and has the moniker the Obsidian War Demon Douglas. Those who have fought against her father are turned into nothing but mangled corpses. Of course, Rudolf is scared, but he can't really run from this. With that, Marquis Douglas raises his wooden sword and tells his daughter to step back. At first, Lisbeth profusely refuses to back off, but then Teresa puts a gentle hand on her shoulder. That means everything's gonna be okay. So Lady Teresa helps Rudolf out of his coat and Lisbeth holds his wooden sword for him. Marquis Douglas then gives one condition to this sparring: just one strike. If Rudolf lands even a single blow on the Marquis's body with the wooden sword, the prince wins. When the Marquis asks him if that's alright, Rudolf realizes Marquis Douglas thinks the prince can't even graze him. With a determined face, Rudolf holds onto his wooden sword and tells the Marquis he appreciates the consideration. At Lady Teresa's signal, the sparring begins. Rudolf can't run away now. The prince then rushed towards the Marquis, literally going straight for the kill. No one ever taught him swordsmanship, but Rudolf has been secretly observing the knights' training and practicing through what he's seen. Rudolf may have learned swordsmanship from just copying the knights, but he's really determined to see this through. And with that, Rudolf lifts his wooden sword on Marquis Douglas. However, the Marquis strikes the prince with just one blow. Marquis Douglas's attack sends Rudolf coughing on the ground. The Marquis's attack was so swift that Rudolf didn't see it coming at all. Marquis Douglas then gets Rudolf's wooden sword and hands it back to him, signaling another bout between them. Determined, Rudolf gets right back up and attacks the Marquis with his wooden sword. But again, the prince is met with the same fate as earlier, and again Marquis Douglas only tells him next, signaling for Rudolf to get back up again, and again, and again. Seeing Rudolf's beaten body, Lisbeth gets teary-eyed as she pleads for her father to stop. But the Marquis still lands one final blow at Rudolf. This is the difference between Rudolf, who has lived leisurely in the palace, and the obsidian war demon who has earned countless military achievements on the battlefield. 300 years of foresight doesn't help in a fight, and landing even just a single blow on the Marquis is impossible. As Rudolf lays on the ground wounded, Marquis Douglas sternly asks him if that's all he's got. With that level of strength, Rudolf won't be able to protect what's important to him. Hearing that from the Marquis has Rudolf gritting his teeth, and not long after, he grabs his wooden sword again and slowly tries to stand up. A crying Lisbeth screams for her fiancé to stop and not to step in again. But Rudolf is resolved on it, shaking as he uses the wooden sword as support to stand up. He has decided back then that he'll resist his fate. Rudolf knows he won't die until he turned 25. That's if history followed through as it should. However, history changed when he became engaged to Lisbeth, and now, Rudolf is in a position where his life could be taken from him at any moment. Not only that, but Lisbeth, who's been by his side, could also be in danger. This is the reason behind the Marquis's sternness with Rudolf. Marquis Douglas is testing the prince to see whether he has the strength and resolve to protect Lisbeth. So, even if he's beaten and wounded, Rudolf insists he can still go on. And with that, the prince lunges straight at the Marquis once more. The reckless thrust from Rudolf's exhausted body is something the Marquis can definitely avoid. Heck, if it were Rudolf, he could avoid it even with his eyes closed. Marquis Douglas thought this would just be the same, just like Rudolf's earlier attempts. However, upon gazing on the prince's eyes, the Marquis is surprised especially that Rudolf's attack seems to be working. The pressure Marquis Douglas had felt was absolutely a killing intent radiating from Rudolf. Right now, the Marquis has no choice but to take the attack. He still doubts it'll make a mark since it isn't that powerful. His doubts are squashed when his old wooden sword breaks in half with Rudolf's attack. And before he knows it, Rudolf had landed a single hit on Marquis Douglas's body. Even Rudolf himself is surprised he did it. And because of exhaustion, the prince ultimately falls unconscious on the Marquis's chest. Later on, Rudolf is laying on the bed with his wounds bandaged. Meanwhile, Lisbeth is writhing in anger over her father's earlier actions. Was there really a need to go that far? Marquis Douglas admits to doing so. Considering the reputation of the prince, he had no choice but to test whether Rudolf was worthy of entrusting the Marquis's beloved daughter. After the sparring, Marquis Douglas had realized the prince's swordsmanship and physical skills are those of a complete beginner. He then realized Rudolf may have never had properly studied swordsmanship. At the mention of this, Lisbeth defends her fiancé by telling her father how it's not because Rudolf has been lazy but because no one has ever paid attention to him. A calm Marquis then agrees with his daughter and tells her to look at the broken sword in his hand. Marquis Douglas shares the fact that his wooden sword broke isn't a joke, nor was it an accident. Marquis Douglas believes Rudolf had purposely aimed for it. His wooden sword is old and its durability was probably at its limit. Although it seemed like the prince kept striking randomly, Marquis Douglas was being tricked to receive his attacks at the same spot repeatedly. Marquis Douglas believes it was a gamble to see if his sword would actually break. But that's not his point at all. What Rudolf had showed him was the ability to judge the old age of his wooden sword and still find an opening even in the face of a hopeless difference in skill. This means Rudolf is a diamond in the rough. With the right polishing, Rudolf will shine. As the Marquis flashes his daughter a smile, he tells her how it's been a long time since he has felt the thrill of battle again. After a while, Rudolf starts stirring in his sleep and soon mutters Lisbeth's name. He struggles to sit up, causing Lisbeth to scold him for moving too soon. Rudolf's eyes widen like saucers as he realizes he's laying on a lap pillow. As he looks up, Rudolf realizes how close Lisbeth is. They've just become engaged and he's already getting a lap pillow from her. The prince isn't so sure if this is normal for aristocrats in this era. As he stares at Lisbeth longer, Rudolf realizes she looks like she's uncomfortable right now, so the prince tells her not to force herself at all. He's now worried that the Marquis sees them in this position and things could escalate. As soon as he remembers the Marquis, Rudolf then remembers the sparring and asks Lisbeth on what happened, and if he had earned the Marquis's approval. Lisbeth recalls the rest of her conversation with her father. Marquis Douglas is sure that Prince Rudolf has the talent to be a king, and judging from that pressure and tactical sense during their sparring, Marquis Douglas can truly say his skill is remarkable. He just feels sorry for him and wonders how he's been treated in the palace. With that, Marquis Douglas can't just sit back and watch anymore. After all, this is about his precious daughter and son. Hearing her father call Rudolf exactly that term, Lisbeth is stunned as well as overjoyed. Marquis Douglas then instructs Lisbeth to stay by the prince's side as he takes care of the guests. When the prince wakes up, the Marquis wants his daughter to tell Rudolf of his approval. With a smile on her face, Lisbeth shares how Rudolf won and her father has now acknowledged him. Rudolf is also glad to hear such wonderful news. Lisbeth then stares at Rudolf with loving eyes as she tells him how he really did well. The two then enjoy this moment of happiness together. Meanwhile, Maya is frustrated because she really wanted to go to Lisbeth's birthday party. She wanted to see the moment when Prince Rudolf gives his birthday present to Lisbeth. Maya was instructed to pick up Rudolf's gift for his fiancée. The prince wanted Maya to find an aquamarine ring that will suit Lisbeth. The maid is now imagining now the gift-giving is turning out right now. Rudolf will call Lisbeth baby as he presents the aquamarine ring that will look perfect on her. Then Lisbeth will be so surprised by how wonderful the ring looks and would praise the talented maid who found it. Maya is role-playing all this with a bear as we speak. Sorry, Maya, but Rudolf can't give the ring just yet. The prince still wants to stay like this for a little while longer.